In the burning heart of the desert, where the hot winds howl across endless sands, the Egyptians of old imagined powers far beyond human reach. To them, the gods were not distant abstractions, but living forces that shaped every sunrise, every flood, every breath of life. Among these divine beings stood one whose very name could stir both awe and fear: Set. Set was no simple villain. He was the embodiment of chaos, storms, deserts, and untamed strength. His figure was unlike any real animal, with a long snout, squared ears, and a forked tail, a mysterious creature now called the Set animal. In the mythology of Egypt, he was both protector and destroyer, the one who fought against the serpent of chaos, Apep, each night to preserve the order of the universe. Yet, at the same time, he was also the god who would betray his own brother, Osiris, and plunge Egypt into one of the most legendary conflicts in human storytelling, the eternal war with Horus. But how did it all begin? To understand the story of Set and his infamous role, we must first return to the golden age of Osiris. Osiris, king of life. Osiris was not just another god. To the ancient Egyptians, he was the very image of life and rebirth. He was said to have taught humanity the arts of farming, the secrets of civilization, and the wisdom of justice. Where once Egypt had been a land of wandering tribes, Osiris brought order, teaching men to sow seeds, to measure the land, and to live in harmony with the cycles of the Nile. As a king, Osiris reigned with fairness and love. Beside him was his queen, Isis, the goddess of magic, healing, and maternal devotion. Their rule was described as an age of peace, where people thrived under the steady rhythm of planting and harvest, and where the Nile's floods, once feared, became a source of blessing. But in the shadows of this golden reign stood Osiris's brother, Set. Unlike Osiris, who embodied growth and abundance, Set represented the harsh realities of the desert: drought, sandstorms, and chaos. Where Osiris brought order, Set brought disruption. He was strong, cunning, and restless. And though he was a god of great power, he was consumed by envy of his brother's throne. The jealousy of Set. In the myths, Set could not bear to watch Osiris adored by gods and mortals alike. Every temple praised Osiris's justice. Every field bore fruit in his name. Isis, beloved by her people, added to the glory of her husband. And together they had a child, Horus the Elder in some versions, or would one day bear Horus the Younger, the avenger who would rise against Set. Set's heart grew darker with each passing day. To him, Osiris was weak, too merciful, too forgiving. Egypt, Set believed, needed strength, dominance, and fear, not gentle order. And so, he began a plot: the coffin of betrayal. The most famous version of the tale tells us that Set devised a cruel trap. He constructed a magnificent chest, carved of cedar and inlaid with gold and ivory. Its beauty was unmatched. It was a gift fit for a god-king. Set then invited Osiris to a grand banquet. The hall was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of roasted meats. Nobles and gods alike reclined on cushions as Set unveiled his chest before them all. "Whoever fits perfectly within this chest," Set declared with a sly smile, "shall take it home as a gift." One by one, the guests tried, but the chest was always too short or too long. Only Osiris, trusting and without suspicion, lay down inside. As soon as he did, Set and his conspirators slammed the lid shut, sealing it tight with molten lead. The joyous music turned to screams as the chest was carried out and thrown into the Nile. Thus did Set murder his brother, not with a sword, not with open war, but with cunning and betrayal. The Nile swallowed the chest, and with it, the life of Egypt's beloved king. Isis's endless grief. When Isis discovered what had happened, her grief shook the heavens. She roamed the land, her tears flooding the Nile as she searched for her husband's body. At last, she found the chest lodged in a tamarisk tree at Byblos, far from Egypt. With her magic, she brought Osiris back to life long enough to conceive their son, Horus, destined to avenge his father. But Set was relentless. Enraged that Isis had undone his crime, he found Osiris's body once more. This time, he hacked it into 14 pieces and scattered them across the land of Egypt. Each piece became tied to a holy site, sanctified as a relic of the god-king. Isis, faithful and tireless, gathered the fragments of her husband. In every place she found a piece, she built a shrine, and thus were born many of Egypt's sacred temples. Though she restored Osiris, she could not bring him back to the world of the living. Instead, he became ruler of the underworld, the eternal judge of the dead. The birth of Horus. While Osiris reigned over the dead, his son Horus grew in secret, hidden from Set's wrath. Isis nurtured him in the papyrus swamps of the Nile Delta, shielding him with her magic. She raised him to be strong, teaching him wisdom and courage, preparing him for the day when he would face Set. The stage was set for one of the greatest rivalries in mythology. Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship and the sky, against Set, the chaos bringer, the usurper of Egypt's throne. But before that epic conflict could begin, the Egyptians saw deeper meaning in this tragedy. To them, Osiris's death and rebirth mirrored the cycles of nature. Just as the Nile flooded and receded, just as crops died and were reborn, so too did Osiris die and rise again in the afterlife. His story was not just about gods, but about life itself. Set's role in the cosmic balance. It's easy to think of Set as purely evil, but the Egyptians did not see him in such simple terms. While he betrayed Osiris and brought chaos to Egypt, he also served as a necessary force in the universe. Without chaos, there could be no order. Without the desert, the Nile's fertility would mean nothing. Set was the harsh counterbalance to Osiris's gentleness, the storm that made peace valuable, the struggle that gave triumph its meaning. Indeed, in other myths, Set was also a protector. Each night, when the sun god Ra traveled through the underworld, it was Set who stood at the prow of the solar boat, battling the monstrous serpent Apep, the embodiment of total chaos. Without Set's strength, the world would have been devoured. This duality, protector and betrayer, necessary and dangerous, was what made Set so fascinating to the Egyptians. He was not simply the villain of the story, but a god who embodied the complexity of life itself. A kingdom divided. After Osiris's death, Egypt was torn between two rulers. Set seized the throne by force, declaring himself rightful king. Horus, though young, carried the divine bloodline and the love of the people. Their rivalry was not just personal. It became the very struggle between Upper and Lower Egypt, between desert and fertile land, between chaos and order. The battles between Horus and Set would rage across heaven and earth, taking forms both physical and symbolic. They fought as wild beasts, as men, even as boats racing upon the Nile. They stood trial before the gods, their arguments echoing in eternity. And through it all, the people of Egypt saw their own story, the eternal fight to maintain balance. The winds of Egypt never whispered a tale as chaotic, cunning, or as endlessly dramatic as the struggle between Horus and Set. What began as the murder of Osiris had grown into a rivalry that would shape the fate of gods and men alike. In every temple, in every papyrus, in every whispered story along the Nile, their conflict was etched, as much a lesson in morality as it was a celebration of cosmic balance. Horus, now hidden from Set's gaze, matured under the careful watch of Isis. She taught him wisdom, patience, and courage, shaping him into a god capable not only of strength, but of cunning. But Set was no fool. He sensed the threat rising from the Delta reeds, the boy who carried the blood of Osiris. And so the stage was set. The throne of Egypt, the symbol of order and legitimacy, awaited a ruler. But who would claim it? The first challenges. When Horus finally came of age, he did not simply march in a battle. Ancient Egyptians loved to embellish their myths with cunning, and Horus was no exception. Their first confrontations were not brute fights, but tests of wit, agility, and strength. In some versions, They transformed into hippopotamuses, each trying to crush the other in the Nile. In others, they became lions, racing across the dunes in blinding sandstorms, claws scraping against stone and flesh. Set's anger was immense, but he was strategic. He could not underestimate the boy whose mother wielded magic powerful enough to rival the gods themselves. Their battles shifted between forms: falcon against chaos beast, man against god, storm against sunlit sky, each encounter more spectacular and terrifying than the last. The Council of the Gods. Eventually, the gods grew weary of the endless skirmishes. Ra, the father of all, called both Horus and Set to the divine council. The gods gathered in their celestial halls, a place of gold and light, shimmering like the reflection of the sun on the Nile. Enough, Ra thundered. Your feud endangers not only Egypt, but the balance of the cosmos. Sit, and let us decide who shall rule. The trials began, and the gods debated fiercely. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, recorded every action, every deceit, every victory and defeat. Even subtle tricks, like using floods of the Nile to disorient one another, were recounted. Each god had their faction. Some sided with Set, respecting his strength and the order he enforced over the desert. Others supported Horus, the rightful heir to Osiris, embodying renewal and kingship. The guile and trickery. This was not a conflict of mere fists. Egyptians loved their stories rich in irony and cunning, and here the myths shine. At one point, Set tried to humiliate Horus by attacking him in a contest of fishing. Horus, however, outsmarted him, using his magical eye to foresee Set's moves. In another tale, Set transformed into a serpent to ambush Horus, but the young god, using a mixture of magic and sheer cleverness, managed to capture Set's essence in a net woven from spells. The myths often describe absurd yet symbolic events. In one, Set attempted to dominate Horus through trickery involving sexual deceit, a metaphor, the Egyptians might say, for domination over power and succession. Horus, in turn, used cunning to expose Set's arrogance. Though shocking by modern standards, these stories were metaphors for political maneuvering and the battle for legitimacy in Egypt's courts. The trial of the eye. Perhaps the most famous confrontation occurred when Horus's eye was gouged by Set. This was no ordinary injury. It symbolized the price of conflict, the cost of challenging a god of chaos. Isis, ever the healer, used her magic to restore the eye, which became a powerful symbol. The eye of Horus, a charm of protection, healing, and restoration. Every time Egyptians gazed upon it, they remembered that struggle and the delicate balance between destruction and renewal. Yet Set did not relent. He continued to challenge Horus, cutting off limbs, striking at his dignity, testing every limit. Their battle was endless, just like the cycles of the Nile and the rising and setting sun. Each god's victory was temporary, a reflection of the Egyptians' belief in the impermanence of triumph and the eternal necessity of struggle. Cosmic implications. Their battles were not confined to the earthly realm. Each clash echoed through the heavens, disturbing stars and constellations. The gods' council often feared that the chaos might give rise to Apep, the serpent of annihilation, who would consume all existence if left unchecked. Ironically, the very god accused of evil, Set, was the one capable of standing against total annihilation. Without his strength, Ra could not traverse the underworld unscathed. Set, the usurper and betrayer, became the protector of creation. It was an elegant paradox. To the Egyptians, life required death, fertility required sterility, order required chaos. Set's actions, while destructive and sometimes morally ambiguous, were essential to the universe's survival. Without Set, the world would collapse into stagnation or destruction. Without Horus, justice and renewal would be meaningless. The peace of the throne. After decades, yes, decades of divine trials, duels, and divine scheming, the gods finally decreed a compromise. Horus would rule Kemet, the fertile lands along the Nile, while Set would preside over the deserts and untamed regions beyond. To honor Set's contributions, he was married to the foreign goddesses Astarte and Anat, and even became a companion to Ra, defending him from Apep each night. The Egyptians saw in this resolution a reflection of their reality. Kingship was a balance between cultivation and conquest, peace and strength. Their rulers carried within them both Horus and Set, embodying the wisdom, justice, and renewal of Osiris, and the strength, protection, and unpredictability of the desert god. The lessons embedded in myth. Through these stories, the Egyptians taught their children about the duality of existence. No force was wholly good or evil. Every act had consequences. Every god had a purpose. Set's betrayal, Horus's vengeance, Isis's devotion, Osiris's resurrection. They were all necessary threads in the tapestry of life. And so, the myths endured. The Nile flowed, the deserts raged, and every night Set battled Apep so that the sun might rise again. The cycle of struggle, reconciliation, and renewal repeated endlessly, a cosmic drama that reminded humanity of its place in the universe, and of the necessity of both chaos and order. After decades of conflict, the tension between Horus and Set had reached its peak. The Nile itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew the outcome of this divine rivalry would shape not just the kingdom of Egypt, but the very cosmos itself. The gods had watched, debated, and occasionally interfered, but even among them, opinions were divided. Some argued that Horus, the rightful heir of Osiris, must reign, while others whispered that Set, the god of storms and deserts, had his own kind of legitimacy. Horus, growing into the falcon-headed god of kingship, was no ordinary young god. He carried the weight of vengeance, justice, and the expectation of humanity upon his shoulders. Under Isis's guidance, he trained in magic, strategy, and combat. Each feather of his wings symbolized knowledge gained, each dive into the river a lesson in patience and precision. Set, on the other hand, remained unpredictable. His violent birth and sterile nature had left him isolated from the continuation of family lines, yet he had mastered cunning, strength, and the art of survival. He didn't fight only with brute force. Set was strategic, a master of psychological warfare. He understood fear, temptation, and the limits of even divine patience. The first major confrontation began with a test of strength. Set, riding a chariot drawn by desert beasts, challenged Horus along the banks of the Nile. The river, swollen from the annual flood, became a battlefield. Horus, in falcon form, swooped down with talons extended, while Set hurled massive stones from his chariot, each boulder cracking against the waters, sending waves surging towards Horus. The gods watched in fascination. Thoth, the god of wisdom, kept meticulous notes of each maneuver, while Ra observed silently from his solar bark, knowing that this conflict had cosmic consequences. "You think you can defeat me, boy?" Set bellowed, his voice echoing across the floodplain. "You are a child of Osiris, but you are untested." Horus responded with a dive so swift it created a vortex in the water. "I'm no child, uncle. I am the heir of Osiris, and your tyranny ends here." Their clash was not only physical, but symbolic. Every strike Horus landed represented the assertion of order and justice. Every blow Set delivered reminded the world of chaos, power, and the harshness of nature. Yet, despite the ferocity, neither could claim total victory. The trick of the eye. Legend tells us that Set, frustrated by repeated failures, attempted a particularly insidious ploy. Knowing that Horus prized his vision, Set sought to blind him. In a fierce duel, Set gouged out Horus's eye, an act so violent that even the other gods flinched. But Horus, with divine resilience and Isis's magical aid, did not falter. The eye of Horus, once lost, was magically restored, symbolizing renewal, healing, and protection. This single eye became a powerful amulet, revered by mortals for thousands of years, a lasting testament to Horus's endurance and Set's undeniable influence in shaping events, even through destructive means. The divine trials. When their battles reached an impasse, the gods decided it was time for arbitration. They convened a council, with Ra, Thoth, and other major deities as judges. The trial itself became legendary. Horus and Set presented their cases, arguing not merely for the throne, but for the interpretation of justice, the fate of Egypt, and the cosmic balance. Set argued that he embodied strength, necessity, and survival. Order without challenge is stagnation, he declared. Without me, Egypt would be soft, untested, vulnerable to the chaos beyond the Nile. Horus countered, strength without justice is tyranny. I fight not for mere power, but for the legacy of Osiris, for the people, for harmony. The gods debated endlessly. Thoth recorded every word, scribes of the heavens taking note of divine rhetoric. Some gods were swayed by Set's argument, recognizing that chaos was necessary. Others rallied behind Horus, believing in the promise of a just ruler. At one point, the trial took a surreal turn. Thoth, bored with argumentation, suggested a contest of ingenuity, transforming into animals, testing the guile and skill of each god. Set became a mighty hippo, rampaging through papyrus reeds. Horus took the form of a cunning falcon, evading attacks and striking with precision. Mortals watching this story would later tell of these transformations as allegories of strategy and adaptation. The black humor of gods. Despite the gravity, Egyptian mythology often allowed humor and irony. In one story, Set attempted to seduce Hathor, goddess of love and joy, to sway her to his side. Hathor laughed so heartily at his awkward approach that the entire divine council erupted into laughter. Even gods, with immense power, were not above embarrassment. These tales served as moral and social lessons. Strength, cunning, and ferocity were necessary, but so were wit, patience, and humility. Even a god of chaos could be humbled by laughter, showing that balance in the universe was multifaceted, not only a battle of might, but of character and perception. Horus's strategic triumphs. Through decades of conflict, Horus began to master the art of persistence. His victories were often small but significant, winning symbolic contests, reclaiming territories, outsmarting Set's traps. Each victory strengthened his legitimacy in the eyes of mortals and gods alike. Yet, Set remained undefeated in spirit. His role was not merely to be conquered. He existed as a counterweight, an essential element of the balance that allowed Horus's triumphs to have meaning. Without Set's chaos, Horus's justice would have been hollow, his victories untested. The cosmic perspective. By the end of these epic trials, it became clear that the struggle between Horus and Set was not just a tale of rivalry. It was a reflection of the natural world, day and night, flood and drought, life and death. Horus represented the order that allowed society to flourish, while Set embodied the chaos that tested it, forced adaptation, and preserved the dynamic equilibrium of life. And while mortals might fear Set as a god of evil, the Egyptians themselves understood him differently. He was not merely a villain. He was a necessary force, unpredictable and wild, yet essential to the very fabric of existence. The conflict between Horus and Set had reached a plateau, leaving the cosmic balance teetering between order and chaos. Yet, the Egyptians knew, as their myths often reminded them, that even the most fearsome god of chaos had a role that could not be ignored. For Set, the storm god, there was a darkness greater than any rivalry. Apep, the serpent of eternal night, embodiment of chaos so vast it threatened to consume the sun itself. While Horus's victories were celebrated among humans and gods, Set wandered the deserts, his fury tempered by necessity. It was during the long nights of Ra's celestial journey that Set found purpose beyond his feud. Apep, coiled in the underworld, rose each night, intending to swallow the solar bark, plunging the world into an endless void. Mortals would tremble at eclipses and storms, not knowing the divine struggle that unfolded invisibly above their heads. Set, paradoxically, became the guardian no one expected. With his immense strength and affinity for chaos, he intercepted Apep's attacks, battling the serpent with unmatched ferocity. While Horus symbolized justice and kingship, Set represented the raw force required to defend the cosmos from annihilation. The irony was profound. The god who had been seen as destructive became indispensable. The night of endless shadows. One night, the darkness seemed eternal. Apep, larger and more menacing than ever, swallowed the stars and engulfed the moon, stretching toward Ra's bark. Even the sun god struggled, his golden radiance dimmed by the serpent's enormity. Set, riding the desert winds and drawing power from the very storms he embodied, launched himself at Apep. The clash shook the heavens. Thunder cracked, stars fell, and the Nile trembled as if reflecting the cosmic turmoil. Horus watched from afar, realizing that the feud that had defined his life also framed this higher struggle. His father's vengeance, Set's chaos, and his own emerging leadership were threads woven into the tapestry of cosmic necessity. Without Set's strength and courage, Apep would have succeeded. Set's strikes were brutal, yet calculated. Every swipe of his hand, every roar, disrupted the serpent's coils, forcing it to retreat temporarily. The battle lasted until dawn, and when the first light touched the horizon, Apep had been pushed back, defeated for another day. The mortals, oblivious, saw only sunrise, blissfully unaware of the cost. The complexity of good and evil. Through this struggle, Egyptian mythology revealed its depth. Set was no longer merely the villain of Horus's story. His violence, his cunning, and his unpredictability, qualities once feared, were revealed as essential forces. Without Set, the cosmos would collapse into entropy. Without chaos, order would stagnate. Horus's justice required Set's challenge. Ra's safety required Set's strength. The gods began to perceive Set differently. Isis, who had guided Horus, approached him one dawn. "Set," she said, "you are feared, yet necessary. Your fury shields the world as much as it challenges it." Set's usual scornful expression softened. "I am chaos, Isis, yet even chaos can serve the greater balance. The universe is not a story of simple heroes and villains. It is a dance of extremes, each sustaining the other." The lesson of the eye. The restoration of Horus's eye, long ago, took on new symbolic meaning. Just as Horus's eye represented healing and insight, Set's dark deeds, his storms and conflicts, were part of the universe's mechanisms to maintain perspective. Even what seemed purely destructive held a hidden value. Apep would rise again, and the nightly battles would continue. Each confrontation became a reminder. The cosmos is alive with opposing forces, and survival requires understanding, strategy, and sometimes cooperation among unlikely allies. The reconciliation of gods. In time, Horus and Set found a measure of mutual respect. Their feud did not vanish, but it transformed. Horus acknowledged that Set's role was vital, and Set accepted Horus's authority as king of the living. Their dynamic became a template for understanding conflict. Opposing forces, when channeled, could produce stability rather than destruction. In mortals' eyes, the gods remained enigmatic. Temples, amulets, and myths celebrated Horus as the righteous king. Yet Set's influence was embedded in the protective rituals, the festivals of storms, and the prayers for strength against chaos. Egyptians instinctively recognized that the world required both order and challenge, justice and power, light and shadow. The cosmic dance continues. Even as Horus ascended, guiding Egypt into prosperity, Set patrolled the deserts, confronting threats beyond comprehension. Their rivalry had matured into a dynamic partnership, though unspoken, rooted in necessity rather than affection. This duality, conflict intertwined with cooperation, reflected the fundamental nature of existence. Life itself is a balance of forces, each defining the other. The myths emphasize that history, morality, and destiny are never simple. Good and evil are not always separate. Sometimes, the god once feared as the ultimate villain is revealed to be the savior in disguise. Set, the god of storms and chaos, became the unexpected protector of creation, proving that strength, when wielded wisely, serves a higher purpose. As centuries passed in the stories of ancient Egypt, the rivalry between Horus and Set transformed from a tale of vengeance into a cosmic lesson. Mortals had learned from these myths that the universe itself was a delicate balance of extremes: life and death, order and chaos, creation and destruction. And at the heart of this eternal lesson stood two gods whose intertwined destinies shaped not only Egypt, but the very imagination of humankind. Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, now fully grown and wise, had taken his rightful place as ruler of Kemet, the fertile land along the Nile. Under his gaze, crops flourished, cities expanded, and civilization thrived. His eye, restored after the brutal battles with Set, symbolized insight, vigilance, and the divine ability to see beyond deception. Yet even with his authority established, Horus could not ignore the deserts beyond the Nile. The vast, red sands where Set roamed, the god of storms, chaos, and untamed power. Set, whose violent actions had once seemed destructive and selfish, now revealed the necessity of his nature. Every storm he unleashed, every sandstorm that swept through the deserts, reminded mortals of the power beyond their control. These forces, feared and revered, maintained the equilibrium of life. Without Set's strength, the Nile's order could be overwhelmed by forces far worse than drought or flood. The eternal battle against Apep. No story of Set was complete without Apep, the serpentine embodiment of annihilation. Night after night, Apep rose from the abyss, coiling through the underworld, intent on swallowing the solar bark and extinguishing life itself. Each attack threatened everything the Egyptians held dear, yet it was Set who stood at the prow of Ra's boat, a paradoxical guardian against total destruction. The battles were not merely physical. They were symbolic, a reflection of universal truths. Set, born of violence and chaos, had gained the experience and strength necessary to confront the ultimate threat. Apep's annihilation could only be opposed by one whose nature mirrored it, yet who chose creation over destruction. Set's fury, once a source of fear, became the shield of life. Horus, aware of the magnitude of Set's role, often watched silently, understanding that his own victories over Set as a rival were part of a larger tapestry. The personal vendettas, the thefts of eyes and limbs, were not just cruelty, they were preparation. Set, by enduring the chaos within himself and harnessing it, had become capable of defending the universe itself. The lessons in duality. The Egyptians, through these myths, taught that life is composed of opposing forces that define each other. Horus represented justice, kingship, and the fertile lands of civilization. Set represented the wild, the desert, and the unpredictable storms that challenged life's stability. Yet neither could exist meaningfully without the other. Without Set's chaos, Horus's order would be fragile. Without Horus's vigilance, Set's strength could become destructive. Even Osiris, though now ruler of the underworld, participated in this cosmic cycle. His resurrection demonstrated the regenerative power of life, made possible only because of Set's actions. The god of death and the god of chaos were intertwined. Osiris's immortality depended, paradoxically, on the violence Set had inflicted. Life and death, chaos and order, creation and destruction, all were interconnected, forming the eternal cycle of existence. The symbolism of the gods in daily life. For mortals, these divine struggles manifested in tangible ways. Farmers prayed to Horus for fertile lands and protection from floods. Merchants and desert travelers invoked Set to shield them from sandstorms and threats along trade routes. Priests performed rituals invoking the strength of both gods, recognizing that the universe demanded a balance of opposing forces. The duality extended to the symbols left behind. The eye of Horus became a symbol of protection, insight, and restoration. The scepter, with the head of the Set animal, symbolized strength, control, and the ability to channel chaos for the benefit of order. Apep, though feared, served as a reminder of mortality and the necessity of vigilance against annihilation. Set's redemption and enduring legacy. Over time, the perception of Set shifted. Though once seen as the god of evil, responsible for betrayal and chaos, he became recognized as a necessary force within the universe. His violent nature, his infertility, and his struggles were not simply flaws. They were part of what allowed the cosmos to function. By facing and defeating Apep, Set ensured that life could continue, that the sun would rise, and that the cycle of existence would persist. Even foreign invaders and later cultures attempted to reinterpret Set's image. The Greeks merged him with Typhon, the Romans associated him with donkeys to mock him, and later traditions cast him as a symbol of the devil. Yet beneath these distortions lay the original truth of ancient Egyptian understanding. Set's complexity reflected the real nature of the universe. Life cannot be divided into simple categories of good and evil. Survival requires the integration of opposites, and strength often comes from unexpected places. The final accord. In the myths, a symbolic resolution emerged. Horus ruled the fertile lands, embodying justice, kingship, and life. Set controlled the deserts, guarding against chaos and defending existence itself. Their rivalry, once brutal and personal, evolved into a cosmic partnership. Each god's actions reinforced the other's role, demonstrating that balance is achieved not through domination, but through coexistence and recognition of necessity. Mortals, observing these myths, internalized lessons about the nature of conflict, morality, and survival. They learned that a figure once feared could become indispensable, that chaos could sustain order, and that life is defined by cycles of challenge and renewal. The stories of Horus and Set became more than entertainment. They were guides to understanding the forces that shape existence. The legacy in modern eyes. Those centuries passed, and the language and civilization of ancient Egypt faded beneath sands and conquest. The myths endured. Modern scholars deciphered hieroglyphs, piecing together these tales of divine conflict and cooperation. And in these stories, the duality of Set and Horus remains a timeless reflection of human understanding. Complexity, balance, and the indispensable role of forces we may fear or misunderstand. Set, the god of storms and deserts, the betrayer of Osiris, and the chaotic force of the cosmos, emerges not as a simple villain, but as a guardian of life. Horus, the righteous king and avenger, represents order, justice, and civilization. Together, they embody the eternal cycle, creation and destruction, chaos and order, life and death. Forces that continue to shape the world, invisible yet omnipresent. As the sun rises over the Nile, casting golden light on the temples and monuments that have survived millennia, one can almost see the gods at work. Set confronts Apep in the underworld, ensuring that the day begins. Horus watches over the living, guiding kings and mortals alike. And Osiris reigns over the dead, completing the cycle. Life, death, chaos, and order, all entwined in a story older than memory, more enduring than empires, a story that teaches that true balance requires embracing complexity, even when it appears dark and violent. Conclusion. The eternal dance. The saga of Horus and Set concludes not with the triumph of one over the other, but with understanding. The myths of ancient Egypt reveal a sophisticated worldview, where duality, conflict, and cooperation coexist. The gods are mirrors of the universe, each embodying necessary forces. Set, once condemned as evil, is now recognized for his indispensable role. Through these stories, ancient Egyptians conveyed a profound message. Life is not simple. Strength and chaos, vengeance and justice, death and rebirth, all are intertwined. Survival depends on acknowledging complexity, respecting power, and embracing the balance that sustains existence. And so, as the Nile flows and the deserts stretch under the sun, the eternal cycle continues. The eye of Horus protects, the scepter empowers, and Set fights against annihilation. The god's struggles remind mortals that life is a delicate equilibrium, where even the feared and misunderstood may hold the key to survival. The story ends not with victory, but with balance, an enduring lesson from a civilization that understood that the universe, like the human heart, thrives in the tension between opposing forces.